Hi, welcome to Ian Wallace, the Messed Up Counsellor. If you're looking at this and thinking about whether or not you would like to share it or like anybody else to see it, then try to make that something that you do. That's not for me, but it's for the people around you who may be going through situation scenarios that you aren't aware of. And it might help them to understand the world, life, relationships in a lot deeper way. Today, I want to talk to you about anger. Is it a negative or a normal emotion? And we see anger as a negative, usually. Um, Anger isn't a negative in my world. What we do with that emotion creates a positive or a negative process. How we work that anger makes it okay or not okay. But being angry is normal. If we try and make anger the problem, then we will, as human beings, because we all feel angry at some point in time, we will make us the problem. So it's more healthy to look at anger as a normal process that all human beings have, or most human beings have, to a lesser or greater degree. But what we do with that anger makes it okay or not okay in relation to other people and ourselves. When we're exploring anger in the room, we try to look at anger as being the end result. It's the action that people have. We then see and track back what produces that process. Think of the anger as being the symptom, not the cause. So if the symptom is anger, then the cause will be before the anger burst, whatever that might be. Now, most human beings, myself in particular, we have a process of emotions that lead up to a process of feeling not heard, not valued, not okay, which leads to a process of feeling frustrated, upset, worried, which leads to a process of having to contain it and contain it to a point where we can't contain it anymore. Now, everybody has got a different process in that. We're not all the same, but there are some similarities. So, how much we can contain, how much we can hold, depends on the individual, quite naturally. But at some point, we have to allow that out. And that's when we get into an anger response. We can either externalize that anger response in a way that's productive or not productive, a way that is respectful or not respectful. And that's a choice we make. We have that choice. We probably don't realize we're making a choice at the moment of it externalizing, exploding, but we are. And dependent on the individual, depends on how we process that. Now, obviously, for everybody, including us, if we process it productively, then that doesn't give us all those other feelings that can come on board about shame and guilt and feeling bad about ourselves. Those are the negative processes come from that explosion of the anger. If we process it productively, and then it can bring us together with people, it can create an alliance, it can create a connection. So when we go through this process of understanding our anger process, and I say everybody's an individual, then we need to track back. If somebody, for example, has a feeling of an old, internalized feelings and emotion process, say, for example, we were angry in a younger time about feeling disrespected by an authority figure, for example, school or parental or something like that, then if that was in a traumatic process, and children's trauma is massively different to parents, so parents are an older person, an adult, may see something completely different from a child's perspective, quite naturally. So if from a younger person's perspective we were feeling that we were being disrespected or not heard, for example, then as we go through life, that might build up a response for us. So that when we get into situations, scenarios, work, relationships, friendships, family, where we feel unheard, that might store the same kind of negative emotions. Now, that might be storing for a while, but at some point, something will trigger a response. Now, it's kind of like the balancing seesaw thing. There'll be a trigger point. There'll be a straw that creates the camel's back. There'll be a drip process where the next drip is the one that overflows. That process will build to a lesser or greater degree with each individual human being differently. But when it does tip, that will tip from some of this old experiential process of not feeling, as this example, disrespected and unheard. When that happens to us over a period of time, it will create this holding of these emotions, holding of these feelings, and these feelings will boil and boil and boil inside of us. And then somebody, maybe somebody fairly insignificant in our world, will say something to us that hits that trigger, hits that feeling, emotion of being disrespected and unheard or not having a choice. And that could be anybody. That could be somebody in a cafe. That could be a bus driver, train conductor. It could be anybody on the planet. It could be somebody cutting us up in a car. It'll have the same feelings and emotions, even though the experience might be different. So as soon as we trigger that experience, that will overflow those feelings and emotions. It will create this tsunami of emotions that comes out in frustration and then anger. Now, if we know this about ourselves, if we've done some work on what our anger process is, what builds it, what adds to it, where it comes from, then we're more likely to be able to work with it as an ongoing process. Instead of storing it, which is not helpful for anybody, we externalize it, we process it, we find a productive way of doing so, then that process will help us get rid of it, dilute it, reduce it, and then we'll find we'll be able to cope with it. So as an example, when I grew up, as I've said in previous podcasts, I'm dyslexic. So when I grow up, I have a feeling and emotion of being not right, of being wrong. So I grow through a process of those internalized feelings. So what I do is I take myself away from areas where that would be part of my world. So I don't go into grammar processes, tests, exams, things where I need to write down things. But it's an internal process of not feeling right, not feeling normal, whatever normal is. So as I grow through a process where people engage with me in my everyday life by making me feel as though I'm not right, I'm not connected, I'm rejected, then that builds in me this feeling, emotion over a period of time, as I've said. So I can go through a process of going into a cafe, being in a queue, waiting for it to be served, and somebody jumps in front of me. Now, this person that jumps in front of me might have their own reasons for doing so. They haven't got time, they're rushing for a bus, train, they've got a friend waiting, they're trying to get from A to B very quickly, whatever. I may take that very personally. I may say, right, okay, they've done this to me. Now, that process of they've done this to me makes me feel as though that it's personal, quite naturally. And if my anger, my frustration, my feelings of that process of not being right, not being okay, being the odd one out, comes to some kind of crescendo at that point, I may externalize all that other stuff, all those previous situations, feelings, and emotions out on this person who jumped the queue. Now, that's not that person's fault. They've jumped the queue and been disrespectful, but the tsunami of stuff that might come out from that would be a completely over-the-top reaction to that person jumping the queue. And they might say to me, well, what are you on about? I just needed to get this drink. I just need to get served quickly because of X, Y, Z. It's not their fault that I have all this internalized process. They've triggered it, yes, and they've done something that's disrespectful, yes, and we need to sort that. But they don't deserve all this other stuff that I've got going off and building. Now, I don't have that conversation with myself at the time, obviously. If I did, then I probably wouldn't be doing that reaction process. So I can either do one or two things with that, putting in that jump in the queue. I can either give them all this tsunami of stuff that's hidden, that's stored, and they get all of it, both barrels. Or I can have a conversation with them. Say, right, okay, what do you think you're doing? Well, this person's just dropped down outside and needs a drink, so I need to get a bottle of water. Well, right, okay, yeah, get a bottle of water. Somebody needs help. But until I have that conversation with them, I have no idea what their motive is for jumping the queue. Now, the motive might just be that they don't like queuing. Okay. And then maybe we need to have a conversation about that. But I'm only reacting to that one thing there and then if I've processed these feelings and emotions behind it, these trigger points, these increasing, storing process that I've been doing. So if I've got rid of all that, then I don't react with the tsunami. I react with the moment. Hey, look, mate, you're pushing in. What's going on? But they don't get all the rest of the stuff. And that's why it's a really helpful process to not just kind of work anger as being a negative process, but in productively working with that anger, those triggers, those reasons why it occurs, the cause, not the symptom, then at least we can engage with something that processes those feelings as an ongoing situation. So if we have to process things, if we have to get it out, it has to come out. It can't store. Storing's not good, usually. It's a negative process. So we need to be able to explore that. Now we can do that through therapy, obviously counselling. If we're able to do that in the moment, maybe not. But we need to process it or have tools to process it. So what we do, or what I do with this, is I kind of like use a timeline process. So I say, okay, anger is the outburst. What's going on when I actually externalize those emotions, those feelings? Somebody jumped the queue. Okay. So what is somebody jumping the queue? What does it feel like when somebody jumps the queue? Because the things we're storing are all feelings. They are from situation scenarios, but they're all feelings. Okay, so when somebody jumps the queue, it feels like I'm not being respected. I'm not being valued. Okay, so where does that come from? Where does that not feeling respected value comes from? Where does it start? What's the origin? So we track it back. We track back where we are and where those things originate from, the cause. Then we do some process around the cause. So I'll give you a real life situation with this. So in my world. So when I'm growing up, I had very little connection with my dad, father figure. And that was not an easy process. There was very little time spent. They would do other things apart from spend time with not just me, with all of us. And they would kind of like remove themselves, which made me feel rejected and not valued. So I'm going through a process of growing up with these things constantly happening. Now, in my world, I think I must be the problem. We always think we're the problem if we don't understand it, usually. So that process means I grow through that process over the years. And that resentment, frustration, disconnection process builds up, as it would with anybody, because I didn't understand it. So when I come into a counselling process and I start learning about all the things I've learned over the last 20 odd years, I realise these things of reflection about why my dad would have done that. So I look for the cause, not the symptom. And the cause was, and he's passed away now, so there's no need to worry about affecting him with this process or people connected to him, is that he didn't have a dad when he grew up. He didn't have somebody he could relate to. His process was that his dad died when he was very young. He had sisters and a mother figure, his mother, but he didn't have any male influence as he's growing up. And he was the youngest of the family, so he got a bit babyish, a bit looked after, everything done for him, kind of a process. So when I did the background history, reasons why he may have done what he did, I kind of changed the process, which I think helps in a lot of relationships, is that I didn't see as him doing this to me, as I felt at the time. I look more at him doing it because of his process of not really understanding what a dad should do, who a dad should be, how a dad should react. Now, that's not his fault. How he reacted is his decision, but I guess he really didn't understand that. Whereas I've done an awful lot of reflection, given the work I do. As soon as I changed that in my head, as soon as I came to that understanding that he's not doing this to me or did this to me, he was doing it because of his world, his life, his stuff, it changed completely how I saw him. And he was still alive at that time. And in the last few years of his life, we started a much closer connection. And we started more connecting with the process. Never really got to the point where, unfortunately, I could be completely okay with it, unfortunately, but it got better, because of this change. If you can see these things, that these people are not doing this because of me, they're doing this because of them and their world and their life, it changes the outcome. It changes how we see anger, for example. So the anger isn't necessarily at the person jumping the queue. It's because of all the things that started about other people disrespecting. The person jumping the queue is the last drip, the last point, the balance process of it tipping over the edge and producing that anger response. So if we can process all that, if we can do that reflection of why we get angry, where does it come from, what are the components, the dynamics of it, what's the triggers, and we can work that out, and then we can start processing those feelings and emotions. And the way we do that is to use an internalising process by externalising. And what I mean by that is we have to understand it's there first. We have to be an internalised process. This is what I'm doing. And then we can externalise it, and we can externalise it in a more productive way. So what I do, and there are many ways to do this, but what I do is I ask people to write letters, but not letters that are going to be sent. Nobody's going to get them. And the letters are about how we feel. So if you take the example of somebody pushing in the queue, then what I might do is I might write a letter to being disrespected. I might write a letter to being not significant. I might write a letter to somebody pushing in. whatever I'm writing to, I write to that thing, whatever it is. So if somebody else came into that, somebody else who had pushed in, then there would be 2 letters. And I write how I feel about what I'm writing to. So I'm externalizing it onto a bit of paper. Pen and ink is better than a computer for this process. I don't reread it or spell check it or grammar check it. Nobody's going to see this. Nobody's going to get it. It's not going to be shared with anybody. So there's no need to do that. Because if I did, I'd probably modify it in some way, might dilute it, might think better of saying the things I want to say. So I don't show this to anybody. I just do it at one sitting. And I can write numerous letters to the same process. Doesn't matter. But that process helps me to externalize onto pieces of paper, as I've said. Then after I've finished it, whenever I've finished it, I just completely and utterly destroy it. So my feelings, my emotions, the kind of dynamics of the anger are given a voice, but a voice that doesn't affect anybody else. Because that internalising process that's externalised through the paper, I'm in control of. There's only me sees it. I just destroy it. So once I've destroyed it, there's a cathartic process. That sounds a really mad thing to talk to feelings or emotions, situations and scenarios. But because that internalised process is externalised in a way I'm in control of it, it reduces those built up things inside of me, and it helps me to navigate things in a much better way going forward. So somebody pushing in wouldn't necessarily get the tsunami of emotions because I'm dealing with it. I'm emptying that process, that emotional container, if you like, on as an ongoing process. So it never builds to the point where I can't control it or contain it because there's less in there, quite naturally. So work out your anger process, work out the components, work out a way of you externalizing that anger, feelings and emotions. Now, some people will do that at the gym. Some people will do that with sport. Some people will do that with ways of externalizing their feelings and emotions. Dancing, swimming, running, some kind of energetic process in externalizing those feelings and emotions. And whatever way you do it is okay. It's not a problem. You don't have to do it my way, obviously. But whatever way it is, make sure you externalize them. Because the person who pushed into the queue, yes, needs to be dealt with. But it's not their fault that you've got 4 years of pain that they're going to get. That's not theirs. And if you externalize it at that point with the person who pushed in and you push back that person, that's not necessarily going to be helpful because they may push back you because they may have their own stuff they're dealing with that they've not externalized either. So work it back, find the triggers, find the dynamics, find the cause, work on the cause, work on the feelings and emotions that go through the cause, release them, understand them, and then you will be in charge of your anger process. Anger isn't a negative, as I've said. What we do with that anger creates a positive or a negative process. And we're not usually in control when we externalize it in that tsunami of feelings. And then that gets us into trouble because we aren't in control. And we should be in control and charge of ourselves. Don't make it a bad thing. Make it a positive thing. Sometimes the energy of anger can be used to change our lives completely in a good way. It can give us that energy to make change happen. It can give us that power, that determination, because it can be used in that way. But how we use it is down to us and down to you. I only know that if you use anger in a way that you're not in control, it doesn't come out well in the end. Either you'll feel bad yourself, feel guilt or shame or whatever that negative emotion is, or we'll do something that doesn't create a helpful process and might even create an illegal process. We might get into a fight, we might hurt somebody. And afterwards, when we look back, then there will be some aspect of atonement, I would imagine, in some way, shape or form. So be in control of your anger, work your feelings and emotions, find the dynamics, find the triggers. Don't allow it to be in charge and control of you. Be in charge and control of it. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully made your world a bit easier. Or somebody connected to you. Even understanding the dynamics of anger can help in a relationship between two people. Because my dad didn't do this to me. He did it because of. And that's always been a helpful process to understand. Thanks so much for listening. My name's Ian Wallace. I'm the Messed Up Counsellor. Take care.